As enticing and lucrative as live service gaming is, it's slowly but surely killing games as we know them. Welcome back to Otaku Daikun, Dai-chan here. As of recording this video, Fate Grand Order's North American version has just released its Grail concert event, a collaboration with Waltz and the Moonlight Lost Room. This was a special rhythm game that released only to the first 500 players in Japan, and it featured a number of awesome songs and dances that could be played with Artoria or Mashu, sporting a handful of fun outfits. Fans used to be able to get around this restriction with emulation, but now the game is no longer available for download on the App Store. For those who did download it 2 years ago and still have it installed, the game is apparently playable in offline mode, but when I tried it, it was a glitchy mess filled with infinite loading screens. As a result, all the amazing stuff that game offered is now essentially gone. There's no good reason for this, and I totally blame live service gaming for letting this happen. Thus, for today's video, I hope you'll indulge me as I rant about my hatred toward live service games and why I think this business model is ultimately a bad thing for gaming in the long run. If you enjoy this content, be sure to like, comment, share, and smash that notification bell as if it were your waifu. Consider supporting us by becoming a paid member on YouTube or signing up through Subscribestar or Patreon. All three platforms offer the same perks, such as early access and exclusive videos like my Lessons in Magecraft series. Without further ado, let's dive in. Considering this channel covers Fate Grand Order very heavily, you guys may already be way too familiar with the live service model, but I'd like you to humor me as I explain the issue to those who aren't so savvy in this field. It also might seem hypocritical of me to criticize a business model that I benefit from as a creator. Let it be said that I like FGO in spite of its live service model, not because of it. If the game had released in a standalone format, I would still be covering it all the same, if not more so. If you aren't aware, live service is the latest permutation of how publishers are releasing and monetizing video games. Rather than buying a game flat out, which is something we've been able to do for decades, live service games are designed to be played as a continual experience. One does not simply purchase Fate Grand Order or Genshin Impact. Rather, you play these games by registering an account and logging into the game's servers. Normally, this model would be reserved for multiplayer games, such as MMOs. In order to actually play a game online with other people, different players need to be connected to the same server, which gathers and distributes data to and from the players, so they all have a unified experience across devices. As a result, when these games shut down service, the multiplayer aspect becomes unavailable, usually signaling the death of the game if multiplayer was its main draw. Many live service games, however, apply this logic to single-player experiences. Sure, they might have online components, but they're usually secondary, with the bulk of the experience being something that could theoretically be played offline with a few design tweaks. FGO, for instance, could totally work without its friend system and support servants. Genshin Impact's two-player mode is, and has always been, an optional feature. There are various reasons why a company would want to do this for their game. One reason is that it allows devs to split up a game's content and drip-feed it to players over a long span of time. Take any single-player RPG, for instance, and imagine if every story chapter, weapon, or character in the game could be released gradually through weekly or monthly updates. In a more invasive way than DLC, this encourages players to return to the same game over and over again, with each new update being something they can get excited about. This keeps a game's hype train running well after its release. Traditionally, a game would be announced, and players would get hyped up for it through teasers, demos, trailers, etc. This hype would build up and climax at the game's release. After some time, however, that hype would eventually die down, with public consciousness moving on to other, newer projects. By drip-feeding a game's content over time, you can effectively repeat the hype process I just described over and over. Every new character and scenario is an excuse to release more trailers and previews, like a fancier version of bumping an otherwise inactive forum post. It prevents players from progressing too far ahead of the pack, allowing anticipation to build and release at planned intervals. Psychologically, this makes us feel like we're part of something big, which helps the game foster and maintain an active fandom. This is great for gamers and developers alike, since it can make the game more fun, while also giving devs time to release content over a broader span of time. Another reason that live service games are so popular with publishers is that they allow for the implementation of gacha, or loot box mechanics. Rather than selling a new character, weapon, or costume as a separate transaction, like DLC, a gacha system has you paying money for the chance to roll certain desirable assets. It's a grab bag. You could dump $15 into the game and get multiple things that you want, or absolutely nothing of value to you. It's all based on luck that's stacked against the player. For as predatory as this is, these games generally compensate by making themselves free to play. With a free door to entry, live service games become immediately attractive to players who don't have any money. Even players who can't afford it as a traditional release may be tempted by the free offering, as it seems harmless enough. What could go wrong? Well, the more you play the game, the more invested you become. When you do start spending money, your sense of value gets skewed by the fact that it's otherwise free. Perhaps it's fair to spend $60 on the gacha, as that's how much a fully priced game usually is. Let's say you spend that amount, but don't roll anything you actually want. Unlike a standard video game, you can't return it for a refund. Either that money goes to waste, or you spend even more to finally get what you wanted from the gacha. As such, you may find yourself spending way more than you would on a normal game just to unlock a character or weapon, something that you'd expect to be in a normal game from the start. Some players are able to avoid spending money, either through luck or tenacity, but most will open their wallets to enhance the experience they've already gotten into. Most importantly, though, there are those who have no barrier, who will fork over limitless amounts of cash, either because they have the money to burn, or they find themselves hopelessly addicted. It's thanks to these whales that live service games are often free to play, and for as much as that seems beneficial to everyone, it's not something we should celebrate or endorse. Perhaps the worst thing about live service games comes from the name. It's a service, and once that service shuts down, the game dies. It's like going to a theme park. You're free to enjoy it while they're open, but as soon as they go out of business, you can obviously no longer go there. For a theme park, this is reasonable, as keeping rides running requires employees and maintenance. The park is physical, so it degrades over time. That, or we have something like a concert. Since we know it's being performed live by an actual artist, we realize it's only going to be available at a certain time and place. Video games, however, don't have this same issue. Once a game is completed and released, it can be copied and played infinitely, since players are using their own hardware to run it. Multiplayer games rely on their servers to stay up, and that costs money. But what about the single-player live services? Devs have taken perfectly functional offline games and forced them online for the perks of being live services. By doing so, they make it so that you, the player, don't actually own the game in any capacity, no matter how much money you invest in it. All those characters you rolled in the gacha are on temporary loan. You paid for the right to borrow them until the game shuts down, which is very different from buying standalone DLC that you can use forever so long as it stays on your hard drive. You can't archive these live service games either, as they're bound to your account, and it needs to be verified online in order for you to play. This means that the value of anything you buy in-game is determined by how long the game remains in service, and how often you play it during that time. It's kinda like a gym membership. If you pay for the month but don't work out, that money goes to waste. Admittedly, Fate Grand Order is probably one of the best live service games to invest in, at least for North America, because no matter when the game shuts down, we know that we have at least 2 years worth of content ahead of us, because we need to catch up to the Japanese release. Any servants that I roll will at least be usable for the next 2 years. There are dozens of anime mobile games that have started and died within 2 years' time. Final Fantasy VII: The First Soldier is one example. It started in November of 2021, then shut down in January of this year. Perhaps if people spent enough money on the game, it would have lasted longer. But imagine investing in the game, hoping to keep it alive, just for it to shut down anyway. Players feel better about investing in a game that will last a long time, but the only way these games can last long is if they're invested in. If I had any say in the matter, I would dictate that all live service games, when they shut down, need to first be converted into an offline experience that players can still pick up and enjoy years after the app stores no longer host it. Things that were once locked behind a paywall need to be unlockable in-game, and any time-sensitive content needs to be made available at all times. Let's talk about time-sensitive content. One of the most nefarious ways that these live service games thrive is by preying upon our FOMO, or fear of missing out. This is a genuine psychological dilemma that causes anxiety and compulsive behaviors. While this fear is generally discussed in terms of people being addicted to social media, afraid that they might miss out on something they don't even know will happen, it also counts when commodities or opportunities are intentionally made to be exclusive. For live services, this means limited-time events and banners. Do you want a certain servant? Well, they might have a banner on the week they release, but after that you may not see them again for a whole year, or perhaps never. If you missed out on a certain holiday event, it might go away forever too. This essentially forces you to play the game at certain times, and it also pressures you to fork out money on the gacha, which is absolute bullshit. Sure, this helps raise the hype for new characters and events, but it also turns what should be a fun, relaxing game into a huge commitment, if not an absolute chore. That brings me to the next reason I hate live service games. It often feels like they play you more than you play them. One of the appeals of mobile games is that they're easier to play on the fly. Since you're carrying around your phone anyway, it makes sense to have games you can play on it. You can hop on and play during your lunch break or during a long commute. There are no rigid save points, so you can stop at a moment's notice. For as great as that is, I actually find traditional games to be more accommodating of my free time. I sometimes need the ability to put a game down for days on end if I have to, but I also need games that I can binge for hours and hours when I do have a break. Live service games fight me on both of these fronts. The bane of my existence is the daily quest, or daily reward. As if it weren't already a hassle to log into the game every single day, I'm also pressured to accomplish certain tasks that refresh on a regular basis. They're repetitive and boring, but if I don't complete them, I won't get certain rewards. If I want to keep up with the other players, I need to stay active. Because of how dailies and weeklies work, I can't just save up these quests and beat multiple of them in one sitting. In certain games, like Nikke Goddess of Victory, by the time I've completed all my dailies, I'm usually too burned out to push on in the main campaign. The only way out of this trap is to finally reach a point where all your characters are max level. You need to get ahead of the curve, such that you're waiting for new content to come out. Thankfully, I've reached that point in FGO, and I only need to play it when there's a new event or story chapter, but it took years to get that far. It must be a royal pain for newcomers to have to deal with. Not only have they missed out on tons of limited servants and events, but they also need to catch up with the story while growing stronger, which, oddly enough, are two separate things in the game. That brings up another issue. Even when you do have all day to spend playing a single game, there are mechanics that prevent you from getting too far. Many live service games have an energy system that refills over time. In FGO, it's an AP gauge that limits how many missions you can attempt in one sitting. Other games limit you to only a handful of attempts per day. Sometimes these limitations can be bypassed by using items, but gaining these items either means saving them up or spending money on them. The only reason I can play FGO for as long as I want is because I've gathered up a surplus of apples over a number of years. It's frustrating how these games want you to play them every single day, but not too much in any given day. That would be fine if there wasn't much to the game, but when events roll around, you're pressured to beat them quickly, or else you'll miss out. All these mixed signals are stressful. Another issue is that these live service mechanics can be applied to literally any game regardless of its quality. After a while, it makes you wonder how much of it even qualifies as a game. There's a reason why publishers refuse to revive dead franchises, but are willing to make an exception for mobile games. It's because the formula is so repeatable that you can shove any IP in and get new quote-unquote content. It's low risk, high reward, with barely any innovation. Also, the idea of idle or AFK RPGs is downright stupid. Most of Nikke, for example, can be played on auto, and for all those mindless daily quests, you'll want to utilize auto for most of them. It's so weird playing a game where you have to say, "Wake me up when it gets good," or if something new happens. I mean, RPGs have grind, but this is just next level. The moment the game can grind for you is also the moment they give you more crap to grind, so it doesn't really seem like an advantage as much as a required mechanic. We've grown complacent with incomplete games that promise to finish themselves over time. We sometimes even encourage the game to take its time because, once it finally ends, we'll no longer be able to play it because the servers are shut down. Sure, some of these games, like FGO, have grown so large over the years that they're worth more than $60. But for as much as I like the story, I think back to how most of the actual gameplay is repeating the exact same fights over and over again to buy out event shops. It's so padded that I wonder how much actual content is even in there. We've reached a point where we no longer get excited about the game itself, but rather the superficial aspects locked behind the gacha system. I always think to myself that these games might be fun if I roll the characters I want, whereas in the past, I could buy a game knowing that everyone advertised in the game could actually be played without gambling for them. This dawned on me the most when Mario Kart Tour came out for phones, and Mario himself had to be rolled through the gacha. What sort of fresh hell is this? Despite all of my complaints, live service games are insanely successful for the reasons I outlined earlier. Spreading out content lets the devs and publishers repeatedly advertise that content, such that it always remains in headlines and discussions. People can still get excited about a new event or character in a game that's been going for nearly a decade. The free-to-play model gathers tons of players, allowing a handful of whales to fund the experience for everyone else. Once players stop thinking about how much content justifies a $60 transaction, the roof on how much they wind up spending breaks open. This is great for companies, and it also gives players an active community to enjoy over the game's lifespan. That's the problem, though. The game has a lifespan. Developers are sacrificing long-term viability for short-term profit. Games that deserve to be archived through ROMs or ports are destined to vanish because their superficial online components keep them tied to a server. These games that you plunge hundreds of dollars into and should rightfully own are instead lost to time. In order to keep us glued to these games during their lifespans, we are psychologically manipulated to be present for every event and every limited time reveal, while also being policed on how long and how often we pick up the game. For many games, this is the future. It really can't be helped. Even if a standalone game sells well, there's always the chance that it could earn even more, and publishers aren't likely to pass that up. For some of you younger viewers, this may seem normal, but as someone who's been gaming for the last 30 years, I can see all too well what we're losing in the conversion. Thanks for hearing me out. At the end of the day, I just hate seeing single-player games become lost media because of the live service format. When I look at Mario 64 still going strong through speedrunning after all these years, I can't help but think that an adorable dancing game with Artoria and Mashu deserves the same preservation. I'm glad I have them dancing in my credits, at least. On that note, I want to open the floor to you guys. Are you okay with live service games? Are the perks worth the downsides? Let me know what you think in the comments below.
Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to Otaku Daikun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!
I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters: VideoGamer75, Elise Trash for Skinko, Dante Pendragon, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, The Nonchalant Ostrich, Otaku Mom, Jens Ballman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Lord Omagoden, Free Brick, Olympian Doll, RNGer Shuffles 1498, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Link Pendrago, King Kobo, Observer Bellis, Flash Daniel, James Hewitt, Uncanny EXP, Andre Foster, Jared Kraus, Matthew McAfee, Game King 352, Caitlin P, Vladimirovna, Jonathan Padua, The Taz 96, President Irina Vladimirovna Putina, Maxwell's Demon, Kengo X77, SF Giants Fan Mike, and Akakaze Yume. Thank you all so much.